Mental health is a public health domain that cuts across a plethora of sustainable development goals. In India, WHO estimates that the burden of mental health problems is of the tune of 2,443 deaths per 100,000 population, and the age-adjusted suicide rate per 100,000 population is 21.1. With such figures, we need to have more conversations around how to approach this problem. Today we have with us Dr. Vikram Patel, who is the Pershing Professor of Global Health and Social Medicine at the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine of Harvard Medical School in Boston, and the Wellcome Trust Principal Research Fellow. Sir has been featured on Time Magazine's World's Most 100 Influential People. He's the co-founder of Sangath. We warmly request Dr. Patel to kindly share his thoughts on mental health awareness.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers of Clairvoyance. This is my first time here, and I'm really grateful to the organizers for inviting me. So what I want to do is I want to first of all start by telling you a little bit about the field of global mental health, and in particular how the field is trying to completely reframe our approach to mental health beyond what has often been a very dominant way of thinking about mental health, which has been about mental disorders, and associated with mental disorders, psychiatrists, medicines, and psychiatric hospitals. In relation with that particular reframing, I want to just draw your attention to the Lancet Commission on Global Mental Health and Sustainable Development. For those of you interested more on the subject, you can go onto this website here. You can download the full report as well as a number of other products, infographics, as well as some very interesting videos that were produced by young people. But what I really want to tell you is what some of the most important messages are from that commission, which I think are really quite important also when we consider how we might deal with the mental health situation in India itself. But before I turn to India, let me just tell you a few things about how the Lancet Commission seeks to almost reimagine and reframe mental health, not as a biomedical issue, but as a global public good. So the first idea is that mental health is not mental illness. The truth of the matter is, when we use the word mental health, that is usually what we think about. We usually think it's almost a euphemism for mental illness, but we never do that with physical health. In fact, mental health is something that each and every one of us here, sitting here today, aspires to. It's something that is a positive life goal. It is something that we wish to work towards realizing. Of course, that includes avoiding developing a mental illness, but mental health is not mental illness alone. It is a universal human quality. So for example, let me try and make that a little bit more concrete. Here you are after lunch, you're feeling a little sleepy, you're trying to concentrate on what I'm saying. The way you concentrate, the way you can actually pay attention to what I'm saying, incorporate what I'm saying, think about it, all of this requires you to use every single ability that we consider as integral to our mental health. In fact, every single point of our life, when we're asleep or when we're awake, what we're really doing is that we're exercising our mental health. If we strip away my hair, my skin, my blood, my bones, what is left of me? If I was a guru, I would say that's my soul. In fact, from a biomedical or a public health perspective, that's what we define as mental health. The second idea is that this is indivisible from physical health. About 120 years ago, one of the greatest disservices that modern medicine did was to split mental health away from physical health due to the ideas which at the time seemed good ideas, the ideas of Descartes and others, that physical health and mental health were completely separate. This has been a fundamental disservice today, and we see this reflected right through the way we address mental health in every aspect of our lives and the healthcare system. We need to bring mental health back where it belongs, alongside physical health. Third, unlike many other health issues like maternal and child health, it is not the case that any country in the world has actually achieved good mental health indicators for its people. So in many ways, mental health is truly the one area of health that unites all countries of the world. All countries are developing in some way or the other when it comes to mental health. Fourth,
Many of you will be aware that a few months ago the World Bank developed a new index. The World Bank always wakes up later than most other people do, to recognizing that in fact the wealth of a nation is not in the amount of money it has, but in the capabilities of the people in that country. And it invented this new idea of human capital. If you look at what human capital is what every one of you here will spend 2 years in this great institution studying about. It's only sad that the World Bank took all this time to figure out that the strength and the wealth of a nation is not only in its banks. And then the final point is that mental health is not something you look at a single point in your life. Typically we think of mental illness as something that happens in adulthood, but the truth is that the mental health that each and every one of us enjoys today or doesn't enjoy today, the foundation of that mental health was laid down in the first 10 or 15 years of our life. And so we must have a life course perspective on mental health. And when you apply the life course perspective, I'm going to show you a few big issues that I think India faces today that some of you may want to work on as you go forward in your careers. The first is in the perinatal period and childhood. We have one of the highest rates of depression in mothers, and we now know that depression in mothers has profound impacts on their children's growth and development. We now know also that India's approximately 200 million children in this country will suffer tremendous insults on early life brain development. Why is that important? That is important because these children, when they enter into school, will be unable to learn effectively. Many of you will know that more than half of all of India's children in primary and secondary school are barely learning at all. And while it is true that many of these children don't learn because their schools are very bad quality, in fact, for many of these children, their very abilities to learn were damaged in the first 3 or 4 years of life. This is very new knowledge, but which is profoundly important from a policy perspective. If we expect children in our country to learn better and become more productive adults, we have to start focusing not on just the schools. By then, the horse is already bolted. We have to be really focusing on the first 3 or 4 years of life in terms of the environments they face that will promote brain development. And thirdly, very recently, my colleagues and I, we published the largest survey from the country and really looking at neurodevelopmental disabilities like autism and intellectual disability, and reported that roughly 5 to 10% of all children in our country are suffering from such disabilities. As you know, the vast majority, maybe 99% of these children will receive no care whatsoever, and many of them will die prematurely. The second important life course stage, which of course is an area that I work in a lot, is with adolescents and young people. Many of you will have seen the study that was published a few months ago. It's astonishing, really, when you think about it. Let's just pause and think about it. That of all of you here in this room, almost all of you will fall in this age group. More people of your age group will kill themselves this year than will die of any other single medical cause. Think about that for a moment. And if I add accidents and injuries, very often these are also part of poor mental health. More than 3/4, 50% to 3/4 of all deaths in young Indians today are due to a mental health problem. And I think in that sense, there cannot be a bigger crisis facing young people from a health perspective. And of course, it's an issue that no one really talks about. It gets reported and it gets forgotten as well. With adults, which is where much of the focus has been on mental health problems, the National Mental Health Survey that was published a couple of years ago by the Government of India, this particular slide shows you the proportion of people with mental health problems who received any care in the last 12 months. And what you can see is that at a national average, about 75% of people with mental health problems receive no care at all. In my mind, this is probably the single largest unmet need for care for any health condition in India. And these are national averages. So if I had to look at rural India, if I had to look at some of the underserved states, that figure is probably 100%. Maybe never has any health condition in our history actually been neglected as much as these conditions. And instead, you see images like this. This is, of course, the kind of care that people with serious mental illness receive in our country. On the left-hand side, you see a picture of a so-called mental hospital. I call it really a torture chamber, but these are actually hospitals run by our government. And on the right-hand side, you see what happens to people with mental disabilities. This is community care. I don't know how many of you have been looking at the stories of people who were lynched in our country in the last year. It's really interesting. Of course, the dominant story and the right story is that these are often people belonging to the minority community. But actually what you may not have noticed is that a third of everyone who has been lynched in India in the last year is a person with a serious mental illness. Just yesterday, we read that a person was murdered because a WhatsApp in front of his mother, actually beaten up by the police to death. I don't know how many of you saw this story. Because people thought that he was a child kidnapper, and the mother simply said he had a mental health problem. He clearly had an intellectual disability. We are lynching people in India today for a number of reasons, one of which is because they have a mental health problem. And then, of course, you have the other enormous crisis that is facing our country, which is the incredible rise of alcohol abuse. But here, of course, is another peculiar thing. We are a country that is completely an outlier. We talk of evidence-based practice, but no country in the world is actually thinking of prohibition as an evidence-based practice to control the drinking problems in this country. Most parts of the world have begun to think of drinking problems as an addiction, as a health issue, to be dealt with from a public health approach rather than a punitive judicial approach. Only in India do we have political parties trying to outdo one another by saying that we will deal with a public health issue by actually criminalizing people who have a health problem. And then finally, if we think of the last major life course age, which is something which will continue to face us as a very significant social issue as we go forward, is the rapidly graying population in our country. This, of course, was not a big issue in the past, mainly because we didn't gray that much, but also because we had extended family systems that would often care for an older person with a stroke or with dementia. Obviously, that is changing very rapidly. The numbers of older people are increasing, but also the social support systems are rapidly declining. And clearly, there is going to be a great need for social support for people with neurodegenerative conditions. So there's some good news as well, and I want to just tell you a few examples of work that I'm doing. But before that, some very important good events in terms of policy to respond to these issues to do with mental health. As you can see, these are very broad issues. This is not just about mental illness and medicines, but much broader issues that affect probably each and every one of us in one way or another. The first is we have a very visionary mental health care bill, one of the most visionary healthcare legislations this country has ever had. Mainly because it also involved a very participatory process in the development of the bill. There was very active engagement, for example, of people living with mental illness and their families. The devil really lies in the detail of the implementation of that bill. And so it still remains to be seen. For those of you who enter into the sector, remember that most people don't even know about the mental health care bill. It is a rights-based bill, one which entitles people with mental health problems to receive publicly funded care through the public health care system. The second is the development of the National Mental Health Mission's Health and Wellness Centers. Sub-centers around the country are going to be redesigned as health and wellness centers, and they're going to have new community health workers. And if you look at the content of what these health centers would be doing, a key element of their work is going to be promoting healthy behaviors and lifestyles, and of course, mental health will figure prominently in that. Many of the vertical programs like the Adolescent Health Program, the Rashtriya Kishore Swasthya Karyakram, the RBSK for young children have very strong presence of mental health and mental disability in them as well. So these are all very wonderful high-level, policy-level statements that are coming from the central government, and many states are also having very progressive ideas. But the problem, of course, is, as you know, in our country, we have wonderful policies, but in fact, oftentimes the real difficulty is implementing those on the ground. And for that, one really does need to work with different stakeholders. And to conclude, I really want to give you 3 examples of things that an organization, NGO Sangath, which I've been associated with for more than 25 years, has been working with different stakeholders to try and get mental health care, to promote mental health, to create a positive view of mental health out into the community. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of stakeholders. The first is with community health workers. This has been, of course, a very central part of my own work. We now have more than 20 publications on randomized controlled trials. All of these that you see here are published in the Lancet. And I think what of these actually show is the effectiveness of the use of frontline workers and community health workers, peers, lay people, in the delivery of psychological and social interventions. The most recent example was published day before yesterday in the Lancet, in which we demonstrated the use of lay counselors to promote adolescent health in schools in the state of Bihar. This kind of evidence is actually transforming our understanding of not only who is a mental health care provider. So, for example, in much of our work we use lay people, just ordinary lay people. More recently, we have now started working with ASHA workers. But also what comprises mental health care. Mental health care is not about just going to hospitals and getting pills, but we are using very scientifically grounded understandings of brain function to design simple techniques that can be taught to people with a range of different mental health problems, from autism all the way through to dementia, and demonstrating, of course, through these trials that they're very effective. The second important stakeholder is the technology industry. We think this is a really exciting opportunity for us to leapfrog some of the implementation barriers in the delivery of mental health care. Sangath right now has got a very active engagement with technology in a number of different ways. The first is using technology to train frontline workers, for example, ASHA workers. We have a very exciting platform that we're building to train and to supervise ASHA workers to deliver healthcare interventions, particularly mental health care interventions, psychological therapies that have been developed by Sangath. The second is directly working with people who have mental health problems, developing apps in Hindi and Konkani at the moment in Goa to be used in Goa and North India, particularly for adolescents who are developing mental health problems. And another very exciting area is to use gaming technologies to actually assess early life brain development in young children. This is very cutting edge, but it's also very, very public health minded, because these are technologies to be used by parents and by frontline workers in children's homes. And the last is engaging young people in particular, because for us young people, adolescents are a very critical group. They're a critical group for two reasons. First of all, because this is the group, which I already mentioned to you earlier, is the group that will experience the most mental health problems of all the different stages of the life course. This is the group in which most mental health problems arise. This is the group that is killing itself in almost biblical numbers. I don't know how many of you know that a third of all female deaths in the world occur in India. And most of these deaths are actually young women. And so we really want to reach out to young people. And the second big reason, of course, is that technology is something that young people are really embracing. So this is an example of the third important stakeholder, young people. We have launched a number of different youth engagement strategies. Some of you may want to go see the English version of It's Okay to Talk, which is a website and the whole associated program of puppet shows, art and media of a variety of kinds to get young people into conversations about positive mental health, but also through sharing stories about their own mental health problems, to really challenge some of the negative views, the stigma and discrimination associated with poor mental health. We're just about to start a very exciting new program of working with young people to really document their own lives and their own stories through a variety of art forms, including video, photography, and painting, and to then curate this into a museum, which will then rotate around 10 smaller towns in India and use that as an opportunity to also engage young people in broader conversations about mental health. Unfortunately, I can't show you my last slide. There was a video, but I'll try and link this. Oh wait, it's going to play? Okay, so this is, let's see if it works. So
Hello, क्या आप एक मिनट निकालकर अपने स्वास्थ्य के बारे में सोच सकते हैं? इसके बारे में आपके मन में क्या ख्याल आते हैं? ज्यादातर हम लोग सिर्फ अपने शरीर के बारे में सोचते हैं, शायद जुकाम के बारे में सोचते हैं, या पेट दर्द, या फिर शारीरिक तंदुरुस्ती। पर हमारे मानसिक स्वास्थ्य का क्या? हम सबसे बेहतर तब महसूस करते हैं जब एक स्वस्थ शरीर और स्वस्थ मन साथ मिलकर काम करते हैं। पूरी तरह स्वस्थ रहने के लिए मानसिक स्वास्थ्य और शारीरिक स्वास्थ्य दोनों ही आवश्यक हैं। पर कोई भी हमेशा तो खुश नहीं रह सकता ना। क्या आप जानते हैं कि हर 4 में से 1 युवा व्यक्ति अपने मानसिक स्वास्थ्य से संबंधित परेशानियों का सामना करेंगे? हम सब की जिंदगी में उतार चढ़ाव आते रहते हैं। ये परेशानियां स्कूल से संबंधित हो सकती हैं, जैसे पढ़ाई का बढ़ता दबाव या फिर अपने अध्यापकों या क्लास के बाकी बच्चों के साथ परेशानी। कुछ परेशानियां घर से भी संबंधित हो सकती हैं, जैसे माता पिता का बहुत सख्त होना या फिर भाई बहन के साथ लड़ाई झगड़ा। दूसरों के साथ परेशानी, जैसे कि कोई आपको सता या धमका रहा हो, या फिर परेशानियां जो खुद से हो सकती हैं, जैसे अपने रंग रूप से शर्मिंदगी महसूस करना। ऐसी परिस्थितियों के कारण कभी हमें अकेलापन या दुखी महसूस करना या फिर तनाव और गुस्सा महसूस करना साधारण है। हम सबके पास ऐसे तरीके हैं जिससे हम बेहतर महसूस कर सकते हैं, जैसे कि गाने सुनना, सैर पर जाना, अपने सबसे अच्छे दोस्तों या माता पिता से बात करना, अपने पेट्स के साथ खेलना या एक्सरसाइज करना। पर कभी कभी हमें थोड़ी और मदद की जरूरत हो सकती है। ये ऐसे वक्त पे हो सकता है जब हम बहुत सारी परेशानियों का एक साथ सामना कर रहे हैं, या फिर काफी समय से कोशिश करने के बाद भी हमें बेहतर महसूस ना हो रहा हो। ऐसे वक्त में जब हमारी परेशानियों के कारण हमें खराब या बुरा महसूस हो रहा हो, काउंसलिंग हमारी मदद कर सकती है। काउंसलर आपको नए और प्रभावी तरीके सिखा सकते हैं जिससे आप अपने परेशानियों का बेहतर सामना कर सकते हैं। वे आपको अपनी कठिनाइयों या भावनाओं से मुकाबला करने के मददगार तरीके दिखाकर ऐसा करते हैं। यह आज की समस्याओं के साथ और भविष्य की चुनौतियों के साथ भी मदद कर सकता है और पुराने समस्याओं को वापस आने से भी रोक सकता है। काउंसलर की मदद से हम अपनी परेशानियों को हल करके अच्छे मानसिक स्वास्थ्य की ओर बढ़ सकते हैं। तो बात करें।
So I just want to thank you for making that video work. So that is actually a video that we prepared for Delhi schools, for the Delhi government.
Thanks a lot, sir, for this illuminating session and for such a beautiful video. It will definitely help us to mainstream this ignored crisis. Now we will quickly move towards our next session of the safeguarding the journey. Food security. Food security or zero hunger goal is goal to in sustainable development goals. The UN notes that 3 in every 10 stunted children in the world are Indians. Also in India, 53% of women in reproductive age group are anemic. The decreasing trend of undernourishment in Asia has been slowing down significantly. In this case, is this a case of law of diminishing returns? Is it time to rethink and re-strategize our action plan on food security for the future? Now we have today Dr. Vikas Bajpai, who has worked as a public health physician in the working class areas of Delhi. Dr. Bajpai has been a consultant with National Health Resource Systems Center and is currently working in the faculty of Center of Social Medicine and Community Health, JNU. He has published extensively on food security, health system and medical research in India. Now we humbly request Dr. Bajpai to take the podium. Thanks.
Friends, teachers and students, and my fellow panelists, thank you very much for having me here. I was asked to speak on food security, and that's all. There was no qualifier with it as to what on food security. It's such a vast topic. I could render food security as a very technical and logistical issue, and maybe walk away with a self-appeasing sense of omniscience. But that would only amount to mystifying what is food security. I think shorn of its trappings, hunger and food security are nothing but purely political issues to the core. And that is what I would intend to bring to your notice today. Let me begin with a few anecdotes. A couple of years back, we had a workshop at our center on food security. And you all must have heard of Mr. Harsh Mandar. He was there. And while narrating, he presented, he told of his experience while he was training as a young IAS at Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy. And he said that we were instructed that as a district magistrate or collector, you must always keep a bag full of grain in your office. He initially thought it's a very good thing. Maybe they are trying to inculcate that sense of responsibility. But then what followed was quite like this, that the moment you have a case of hunger death reported, you drop a bag of rice anyhow through window or whichever way in that house, so that the family cannot claim that the person died of hunger. This is another statement which I am presenting to you. It was written by a French colonial inspector posted in Western Africa. One can only wonder how it happens that populations who always had on hand 3 harvests in reserve, and to whom it was socially unacceptable to eat grain that had spent less than 3 years in the granary, have suddenly become improvident. They managed to get through the terrible famine of 1914 without difficulty. However, since the late 1920s, these populations, once rich in food reserves, are now living from hand to mouth. As regards our own country, even though the British who ruled over India for nearly 200 years claimed that they had rescued India from timeless hunger, their claims rang hollow in face of the results of an 1878 study that was published in the journal Statistical Society. The study documented that till that time, while there had been as many as 31 famines during the 120 years of colonial rule in British in India, there were only 17 recorded famines in previous 2 millennia of the Indian history. Geographer Michel Watts has observed famines are social crises that represent failures of particular economic and political systems. Further, but 2 years back, I was sitting with Dr. Binayak Sen in a common friend's house. I knew Dr. Sen was working on tea plantation workers in North Bengal, and he had reported to me earlier that the situation of hunger is terrible out there, and that the mean BMI which he found was 14. So I narrated to him findings from my own PhD work in district Sitapur in UP. And as I was about to say that Dr. Sen, the mean BMI in the villages I visited, before I could say, he said 14, and we really laughed. But of course, it was laughter of helplessness. Bad news has stopped shocking us anymore, really. And I really dread the day we would start enjoying it. But let me try and shock you. These 2 villages, Alipur and Ramwapur, they are in Block Pisawa of Sitapur district, which is in central UP. Now, my thesis research work was on the impact of Narega on household food security. And village Alipur, it was a very organized village. Both were Dalit villages. They had this a peasant organization working over there, and they had really fought tooth and nail for implementation of Narega, which had had its beneficial effects also, which I have documented separately. But nevertheless, talking in terms of overall well-being of the people, see, the mean BMI in Alipur turned out to be 4.16. And that in Ramwapur, where also Narega had been implemented but quite in the official way, the mean BMI was just 12.97. And for the benefit of those who may not know, as medical students we were taught that a BMI of less than 14 is incompatible with life. So you can just imagine on how little people are surviving in this country. And unlike tea garden workers of North Bengal, Sitapur is nowhere on the hunger map of the country. Now, nearly 69% of the people in Alipur, they were severely thin of all the sample, and I had 40 households in each village. The similar figure was 84% for Ramwapur. People with below normal BMI, they were 91% and 93% in the respective villages. And when you come to children less than 10 years of age, 100% of the children in either village were severely thin. And we shall, wait no ends in claiming food sufficiency in this country. Now the question is, so what is food security and how do we really understand it? Yeah, I just, sorry, slide free now. Yeah, sorry for the delay. Formally defined food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Now this definition can be divided in 4 components, which are as such: food availability, food has to be available before it can be distributed and consumed. Then food access, and the access would include both physical and economic access. And the third relates to food utilization in preference with their dietary preferences, okay? And sanitation and all that. When you include that, it becomes nutrition security. Now all these 3 aspects of food availability, access and utilization have to be available for all time. So there is a time dimension to it, the 4th dimension. As such, it may appear simple. But then, if you go and break it further, you realize how complex the problem becomes. Now, food availability. I suppose ever since Green Revolution, we've always boasted that we have food to feed our population. But it is not simply a matter of having enough food. Your ability to be able to have enough food to feed the people would depend on many things. Import and export of the food. And there can be any number of policies that can be cited where Government of India has exported food at less than below poverty line prices to be fed to pigs in Europe while people have been dying of hunger in this country. Even in your state, in Maharashtra, grain from public granaries has been given to breweries to ferment. So all of this is there. Moreover, we almost have stopped talking of the agricultural crisis, farm crisis which exists in this country. And even when it gets talked of, it gets talked of in terms of those farmers who have land, who are indebted, but a large number of our peasantry who are landless Dalits, tribals, okay, they don't even get counted as farmers. They don't even get mentioned or talked about. All these are problems which impact on your ability to be able to produce enough of food. And I mean, there's no time to go into the entire details of it, but I'll try and touch it somewhat later. It depends on what are the relations of production. See, any production, any productive activity, may it be in industry, may it be in agriculture, it's not simply a matter of technique and technology. Okay, and you need skilled people to deploy that technique and technology. Technique and technology for whose benefit? To subserve whose purpose? And these are emphatically political questions which have to be raised. In this country, where chronic dietary energy deficiency continues to be the overbearing problem, nutritional problem, we have governments encouraging farmers to grow cherry tomatoes, gherkins, salads, in order to be able to get good market price, export price and whatnot. Nevertheless, now food access would depend on food distribution system, purchasing power, subsidies, caste, class, gender, all these things they come into play. Lest we think that we've opened a PDS shop, the food is available, anyone can walk in and have his fill. I mean, mind you, all the villages I was talking of, they do have a PDS system. They have a working PDS system. But what do you do of it when the entitlement is barely 7 kgs a person per month, which does not even give you poverty line level calories? Now, all these processes, the way they will work, that is determined by the social, economic and political structure of the society. It is this structure which decides the policy paradigm. And policy paradigm could be of two kinds. It could be equality oriented. See, food is there in the market, it's available in the shops. Anyone who wants, they can go and have it. But then we know markets only recognize those who have the purchasing power. There could be equity oriented policies as well to ensure that those who need the most get the most. So, coming to what the reality is, there was a famine commission set up by the British in 1880, which said that if the per capita availability of food grain goes down 200 kgs, then it's a famine situation. So in order to avoid famines, you must always have a supply of more than 200 kgs per capita. And in the table below, it gives the amount of food, per capita food grains availability since 51. Mind you, this includes the years of Green Revolution. In none of the years we have had that much per capita availability of food as was recommended by the famine commission of colonial era. I suppose independent India should have provided better for her children. Now, the calorie consumption, you can see that both across the rural and the urban areas, the consumption of calories until at least 2011-12, it has consistently declined. And it has declined in face of booming economic growth, or shall I say boomeranging economic growth. Depends from where you are seeing it. You know, I mean, we all sit here, we all are well fed, so we will have a different perspective. We will even have a different perspective of nutrition. Now, let me just point it out to you. These are trends of males and females between two BMI trends. Okay. A percentage of males with normal BMI in 2000, these are the latest figures which were available from WHO website. In 2006, only 56.6% of Indian males, they had normal BMI. Okay. Percentage of males with BMI indicating obesity. In 2006, it was 1.3%. In females, obesity was 2.8%. But if you were to see the media reports and all, I mean, one would come up really scared. Obesity is increasing. It must be. The point is where, in whom, okay, and from what base. But then it helps to give a spin to the whole issue. Obesity is increasing. We are getting diabetes, diseases of affluence. We are becoming an affluent society. But mind you, in the whole of state of Uttar Pradesh, with the population that it has, as per the latest round of NFHS survey, obese population amounts to just 2.1% in UP. In Sitapur, the only overweight people I saw, few of them, were in the town of Sitapur. In the entire rural areas that I could manage to visit, I didn't see a single person who was even overweight, and my data shows it was difficult to find one with a normal BMI as well. Obesity, it's classically a class divided phenomenon. You can see from this, in the lowest income quintile, what is the proportion of obesity? And in the highest income quintile, what is the proportion of obesity? But mind you, presented out of context, all the figures of obesity, they can potentially direct all research on nutrition in a very, very different direction. In 2011, ICMR came up with new recommendations regarding dietary energy norms. In that entire document, at a couple of places, they have mentioned dietary energy deficiency to be the major nutritional problem. And yet, the dietary energies, the recommended levels, they have quietly lowered it without giving even a hint in as much as the reason to that. I'll come to an end. There is a lot that I can say, but you see, what is the major problem? You see, this is a graph which shows the distribution of our workforce by different sectors of economy. And in the brackets are given the productivity of those sectors of economy. Now you can see, majority of the workforce, it is trapped in least productive sectors. Not that there is something wrong with those sectors per se by the nature of those sectors, but it's just that the ruling elite, the ruling classes are simply not bothered about that. What happens to those sectors? Mind you, there were editorial columns in newspapers about 7-8 years back in an Indian Express. I read it. What is all this big talk of food production and all? There is enough available in the international market. We can always import it. Okay, means we can let the farmers be the way they are. The collective conscience of this nation fails to stir despite the fact that more than 0.4 million farmers have committed suicide since 1995. I mean, elsewhere, I believe, in any country which has even the slightest claim to being humane society, this would be blasphemous. Nevertheless, I leave you with just to give you an idea. These are various estimates of poverty that we have, and government never tires juggling with poverty figures to define it as stingily and to apply it to as little as possible number of people. There are poverty lines corresponding to same year which give radically different estimates, all government. I'll leave you with this quote. I wish I could talk more about what is the solution, but whatever it be, question about food security is not how do we feed people. Question about food security is how do we enable people to feed themselves, which is what any self-respecting person would like to do, which is what I would like to do for myself. And doing that means disempowering the powerful to empower the poor. I leave you with this quote of Paulo Freire and just try to absorb. Its import. It's not easily absorbed. Any attempt to soften the power of oppressor in deference to the weakness of the oppressed almost manifests itself in the form of false generosity. Indeed, the attempt never goes beyond this. In order to have continued opportunity to express their generosity, we have had many such generous schemes, the oppressors must perpetuate injustice as well. An unjust social order is the permanent front of this generosity, which is nourished by death, despair, and poverty. This is why dispensers of forced generosity become desperate at the slightest threat to its source. True generosity consists precisely in fighting to destroy the causes which nourish false charity. False charity constrains the fearful and subdued, the rejects of life, to extend their trembling hands, whether of individuals or of entire peoples, need be extended less and less in supplication, so that more and more they become human hands which work and working transform the world. And this fight by the oppressed for their liberation, because of the purpose given to it by the oppressed, will actually constitute the lovelessness which lies at the heart of oppressors' violence. Lovelessness even when clothed in false generosity. We are nothing without our people, and we are not going to solve anything unless we mobilize people to solve the things. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for so much food for thought. We now move on to the next session on epidemic management. Louis Pasteur described what they do. Robert Koch postulated on how they work. Alexander Fleming found a way to stop them in their tracks. Almost a century later, we are still continuing the battle against communicable diseases causing pathogens. At this cusp of epidemiological and demographic transition in India, the need to effectively manage and prevent and contain epidemics is a key step in reducing the dual burden of diseases. We all hope for the best, but need to prepare for the worst when it comes to epidemic management. How do we go about this? We are honored to have Dr. Sanjay Madhav Mehendale to enlighten us on epidemic management. Dr. Mehendale is currently the Director, Research, PD Hinduja Hospital and Medical Research Center. Dr. Mehendale is also a former Additional Director General and Scientist H, Indian Council of Medical Research. Dr. Mehendale has worked in diverse projects with National Institute of Radiology, Pune, and National AIDS Research Institute, Pune, during his career. We invite Dr. Mehendale to give his talk.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Dr. Shalini and Dr. Sivakami, to be here with all of you. I also see Professor Sundarajan here. Actually, very glad to be here. I'm going to talk about the issues in epidemic management. And this whole thing starts with the issue of preparedness. You know, this is the most neglected area while we talk about and think about epidemic management. Because if we are really good in preparing ourselves for the emerging and re-emerging infections, and I will talk about what do they mean actually, and at predicting as well as forecasting the impending outbreaks, we will be able to do a much better job than what we are able to do today. So basically over the last several years, last 30-40 years, we have seen a lot of epidemics coming and hitting us. The latest one being the H1N1, all of us know. We experienced HIV/AIDS, we experienced SARS, we experienced plague, we experienced acute encephalitis syndrome, Nipah virus, anthrax, MERS. All these came, they became big news for a certain period of time. Some of them continue to affect us, some of them have gone. Doesn't mean that they have gone forever. Emerging diseases are those which were not there with us, but that have come to visit us. They have visited us, caused some kind of an impact on human life and economy, and have been remaining with us in a subdued manner. There are certain infections which just went like this but then came back again and now are bothering us again and again. There are good examples like malaria. We felt once that we are able to make a good control on that. We felt chikungunya is gone starting from 2006. It just went on to play a lot of havoc, but by 2011 suddenly chikungunya was gone, but it has come back all over again. So many of these do keep coming and going. So these are the kind of problems that we are going to face. One thing is we have to understand they will always be with us. Every time the problem will change, the nature of the problem will change, but some or the other public health problem in terms of outbreaks and epidemics we will always have to deal with. There are many factors that can be linked to this emergence and re-emergence. The most important being discussed these days is zoonosis. Many of these new viruses that we are coming across, or many other pathogens that we are coming across, are primarily found in animals. They are accidentally spilling over to human beings. Not only animals that are in our close surrounding like pets and other domesticated animals, but now as we are going into the territory of wild animals, some of the viruses which we were not exposed to all these days, we are also getting an access to them and bringing them back into humans. So there is a very strong zoonosis angle to this. Zoonoses are diseases which primarily affect animals but are capable of spilling over to human beings. Microbes are adapting themselves also to a large extent. They are changing their structures. So influenza virus changes its structure, and by the time you are able to do a good vaccination against the prevalent strain which is there today, 3 years down the line you get another strain which has changed in its structure and is capable of starting a new epidemic on its own. We are getting many organisms where we are now talking about antimicrobial resistance. You know, this was for the realization about this resistance to various microbes that we are dealing with is becoming more and more glaring. We have started very sincere work at the national level on detecting antimicrobial resistance very recently, and it is really shocking to understand Why we see that? This is one of the reasons why I see huge mortality in many of the hospitalized patients as well. Another factor which facilitates this whole thing is international travel and commerce. People who are infected travel abroad, then they take the disease with them. Through the trade links, through the products that are used in the trade, the infections can carry to the neighboring countries. There are porous borders where there are no regulations how people go from one country to another, and that's how also the disease tends to travel, which is another important thing. This is a classical example is SARS, where the whole disease started in a single hotel. It spread among few people in that particular hotel, and from there every individual going back to his own country took the disease there, and eventually it spread to large number of countries, nearly 25 countries, causing 8,500 cases and 850 deaths over a very short period of time. This is the kind of havoc some of the diseases which are capable of transmitting quickly can cause on human beings. But one good thing, this was one of the first diseases, I would say, wherein scientists through a very coordinated effort, committed effort, were able to produce vaccine in a record time point, and we now have an effective vaccine to deal with this. So, as bad things are happening, technologically we are also advancing. There is also inadequacy of public health infrastructure that leads to resurgence of some diseases. For example, the deterioration of vector control measures. You know, one of the most important epidemics that occur in our country are almost invariably due to vector-borne diseases. And the most effective way for control of this comes through vector control, but this is the most difficult thing and a great public health challenge. It should all start with elimination of breeding places of mosquitoes. Are we able to do that? Had we been able to do that, we would have eradicated malaria, we would have eradicated dengue fever, we would also have had a good amount of control over chikungunya, but this doesn't seem to be happening. So this is a problem. As you can see, the various countries that have been reporting dengue outbreaks in the last almost 50 years has been continuously increasing, and many countries in the world are getting affected because of dengue fever. Lapses in immunization, one very classic study talks about how the problems due to various political problems, social problems can lead to occurrence of certain diseases. This is a case of former USSR, which got broken down into several smaller countries, and until very recently the things were quite okay as far as diphtheria is concerned, but since this breakdown happened and many new countries came in, the whole emphasis on diphtheria vaccination just was gone away. It went away, and it led to large epidemics due to diphtheria in all these states which have come up as a result of division of USSR subsequently. Which are the emerging infections in India? We also are seeing a large number of emerging infections. We have seen plague recently. We are seeing Nipah virus reported. We see H1N1. We see chikungunya. We see dengue. We see Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. We see Kaisalur forest disease. Many of them are emerging in a very big way. In Surat in 1994, within a very short span of few days, large number of people were affected. It led to such a big panic that nearly 25% of the population of Surat just fled away because they were terribly afraid of contracting plague in the whole city. So this was a problem very recently, 2 decades back, it affected us. See the picture of dengue fever over the period of time, how it had changed, the graph had changed in India. Darker it has become in the recent times, 2010 to 16, what you can see is the prevalence going very high over almost all the states in India. Earlier it was sparingly reported 20-30 years back, but now it can be seen absolutely everywhere in India. Vector control, as I talked about you, how are we going to achieve it? Look at the various places where water can get accumulated. This happens both in urban areas, this happens in rural areas. Some of our research in rural areas where we were able to detect, I was in NIV at that time, so way back, we were able to publish some papers about presence of dengue fever in rural Parvani district of Maharashtra. And what we found the cause to be was this: the household storage tanks just outside your house. The simple problem to that is, in many of these, the government had started giving emphasis on giving the piped water. But piped water would not necessarily come every day and at a specified point of time. So people had to store water in their households, which made this particular, all those places and vessels where it got water got stored, they became the breeding places for mosquitoes. And how this is how dengue became a big rural phenomenon all over India over a period of time. Similar things were noted in Kerala, where you can see this rubber plantation where they are collecting those hung those vessels over there where this rubber solution gets collected. That these were found to be the places where mosquitoes started breeding, and then we had to think about various strategies to try and prevent mosquito breeding in such places. Acute encephalitis problem is something which is again bothering us quite a lot. The most important point we have to understand here is these cases are all the time on the rise, particularly in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. But the line on top just talks about the Japanese encephalitis as one of the causes here. What is important to understand is this disease largely remains undiagnosed even today. Very recently, just last year, papers have come about one potential reason for this could be scrub typhus. So this again is a disease, primarily a zoonotic disease, but has spilled over into human beings. But still, there are many agents that cause acute encephalitis and deaths in children in the states of UP and Bihar, but we still don't know what the cause is all about. This is where the India map shows in green the areas where Japanese encephalitis is a problem. Earlier it was a problem of selected states, but it has also spread over many areas. We had almost forgotten about Kaisanur forest disease. Kaisanur is a forest in Karnataka near Shimoga and the districts surrounding that. There were few districts which were reporting cases of Kaisanur forest disease. But now you can see it is reported in Tamil Nadu, it is reported in Kerala, it's also reported in Sindhudurga district of Maharashtra. So although this disease was pretty restricted, it's a tick-borne disease, and it was all felt that by proper immunization it was also possible to bring down the cases here. Suddenly we start seeing the cases in different parts of the country, mainly because these all other parts of the countries do not have a strategy for immunization against the Kaisanur forest disease. This was reported by National Institute of Virology for the first time, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. It is also a very deadly disease. It causes fatality in many cases. Mostly spread is through bites of ticks. It's a viral fever. And there was an outbreak which was reported in Gujarat pretty recently in 2011. So this is again something which we will have to be looking at in the near future. Diphtheria is something which is known to us for several years. Vaccine against diphtheria is available again for a long time. But what's happening is somehow these DPT booster doses are not getting covered adequately, and that's one of the reasons diphtheria seems to have come back. And you see even large mortality in these areas. So what you can see now are these outbreaks which are reported in Delhi, Assam, Maharashtra, Karnataka, various states of India. But what you can see surprisingly is that curve which is shown here talks about the mortality rate or case fatality rate, which is as high as 50% in some areas. So a point of great concern we have to be worried about. If we have to think about towards the end about the strategies for prevention and control of these epidemics and emerging diseases, there are international health regulations now, and all of us generally in the area of public health accept and abide by all of that, and various strategies which are enumerated under that, and we have to be ready with that. I'll go one by one. The first and the most important one is the surveillance and risk assessment. This is part of that preparedness process that I talked about. But what is it that we are going to do under surveillance? For how many diseases are we going to have surveillance networks so that we keep tracking all of it? Please remember, laboratories investigations are always very expensive, and so we cannot always necessarily depend on the lab support, but clinically we have to be very vigilant. We have to find out anything which is happening for the first time. We have to be vigilant about things which is happening atypically, because epidemic by definition itself is occurrence of a large number of cases in a particular area at a particular time, far in excess of what is expected there at that time. That is what we call as epidemic. So if there is nothing in a particular area, even the first case becomes the start of the epidemic in that area. And our surveillance mechanisms essentially should have the ability to pick up the early cases. Laboratory preparedness is must because it provides the early clues about what we are dealing with. Many outbreaks even today get unnoticed or undiagnosed. That is because we don't have appropriate laboratory facilities. To diagnose various fevers or pathogens, we require the samples have to be collected in the right way, the right samples have to be collected, and they have to be transported into the right lab in the right conditions. All this has to happen, only then laboratories can play a good role in epidemic control. But we have to build that capacity over a period of time because it's a very important complementary activity to the surveillance part. Control of zoonosis gains significance. See, this is nowadays, I'm sure you have heard of the concept of what is called as One Health. We now have started talking about One Health, where we realize that human health doesn't come on its own all alone, but probably it has a lot of influence by animal health also. So if we have to look at control of diseases in humans, probably we also have to look at control of diseases in animals as well, equally effectively. And that's the reason why control of zoonosis becomes an absolutely important thing. But what we sadly see here is the human public health departments do not necessarily talk with the animal public health departments, and they do not have any integrated programs for prevention and control. And that's the reason why we are not able to achieve much in this area which we should be able to. Needless to say, infection control and prevention, they are the most important things. Even if the disease gets notified, certainly the chain of transmission can be broken through various measures which have been known to us. Hand hygiene, starting with as simple as hand hygiene and personal protective measures, as well as prevention of needle stick injuries, respiratory hygiene, environmental cleaning, waste disposal, and patient care management. All these become extremely important. One more issue I would like to touch upon, and I consider this as an important one, is that of effective media engagement. Many a times, some outbreaks which are not outbreaks get reported as outbreaks. Many a times, even serious outbreaks are there, but they do not get reported, and people are just not aware of what's happening all around. This is because of inability of public health professionals to talk effectively with the media. I suppose media plays a very major role in our lives these days, and we try to seek information, we try to seek knowledge about the recent events as they are happening through the media. And so talking with the media, engaging the media in the right way to give and communicate good messages to the people, right messages to the people, is critically important. Many times rumors start just because people do not know exactly what is happening all around. And so alleviation of these rumors also can play a critical role in control of epidemics. Health emergency communication, this plays a very important role in media engagement. There has to be operational communication also. As things are changing, sometimes the type of messages that you are giving out as public health professionals also have to change. They have to be dynamic. That all depends on the phase of the epidemic or the stage of the epidemic that we are dealing with, and it has to be taken into consideration. After all, in many cases, it is the behavior change which can change the course of the epidemic. But so our communication efforts should essentially aim at achieving that. Mostly we fail in this particular aspect because they are not emphasized in the right way. Emergency preparedness, government is giving a lot of importance to that, but government alone probably won't be able to do it. So it is important to develop and maintain public health emergency response plans, to put together the rapid response teams which can just get together within a couple of days and get out for the investigation and control of the epidemics that are happening. So basically, these are the principles that we have to deal with. I just wanted to bring to your notice that the epidemic management doesn't start when the epidemic has already struck. It starts much before that. We have to think about preparing ourselves for any kind of a epidemic that can happen. We have to have the response teams ready. We have to have the appropriate structure ready, which can take care of a large number of cases. Even sometimes you require large number of admissions because of the epidemics. So even the inpatient care facilities and all that preparedness is critically important. Surveillance networks which are established in the country and which are being established more and more, covering more diseases, will help us out in achieving this particular objective. ICMR has established a virology diagnostic network over nearly 70 laboratories all over the country in various medical colleges and has a plan to expand it to 250 laboratories. They are tracking all viral infections that are happening. There is a surveillance going on all fever cases or diarrhea cases, and they are able to pick up some outbreaks. But this is a tough job, but it has to be done, and it's a public health challenge. It has to be faced. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We now open the floor for questions from the audience. Please specify to whom are you asking your question.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sir, immunization program has proven to be a very effective tool for epidemic management. But recently I came across a piece of news that after spending 3,000 crore, Indian government seeks help, 100 crore help from Galleon International donor to sustain their polio vaccination program after Sanofi, the sole supplier for the polio vaccine, increased their prices. Isn't this an alarm that the government really need to set the priorities about the spending of the budget and allocation of the budget?
Thank you. See, always allocation is based on the projections which are made by a group of people, which includes policymakers, program managers, and many other stakeholders as well. You must be aware that very recently the biggest change in polio immunization happened because we are transitioning from, we have already eliminated polio, but there is still some transmission going on, and the only scientific way to kill this or stop this is believed to be now shift to the killed vaccine compared to the oral polio vaccine which was given all those years. So the government revised this strategy. So the major issue that came up was the availability of the killed vaccine, which is now introduced into the program. To what is the problem with oral vaccine versus the killed vaccine? The oral vaccines gets excreted the virus through the fecal route and then is capable of circulating. There is some fear expressed by some people that it can in itself also initiate infection. So, and also the Salk vaccine, the original Salk vaccine or the killed vaccine now is capable of giving a more complete immunity. That's the reason why we are changing over to the injectable vaccine. All this resulted into some kind of miscalculation in terms of the budgets that were required to run this particular program, and which results into the kind of situations that you talked about. But I would say this, we should feel really very proud about one thing, that in spite of all our problems, in spite of all the inadequacies at all levels, we still were able to eliminate polio, which was approved by WHO and was accepted by everybody in the world. So these kind of miscalculations do happen.
Good afternoon, panel. My question is to Professor Bajpai. First of all, thank you, sir, for that insightful presentation on food security. But I have a couple of questions. So first was when you mentioned in your slide that the British report, the British colonial government report of 1880s, which said that they set the limit of 200 kilograms to classify whether a famine situation was there or not. So, and also you mentioned that India never reached, post-independent India never reached that level. But why do you think then that the governments of post-independent India were not able to declare any famine post-independence. And so I had another question. So somewhere in your presentation, I felt that you somehow downplayed the situation of overnutrition in the country, and because yes, there is a class angle, there is also a regional angle to overnutrition, but if you look at the penetration of market economy, so if you go to any of the remotest villages of the country, you will find the Parle-G biscuits, kurkures and confectionaries. So I think that our strategy to address the issue of malnutrition should be more dynamic rather than compartmentalizing into undernutrition and overnutrition. And I also feel that market economy does not leave anyone, regardless of caste or class or regions. So these are the two questions that I have. Thank you.
See, the question of why famines are not declared. You had such a big tragedy in Kerala just now. A couple of years you had this cyclone coming in Orissa, which had caused devastation, and there were calls that it should be declared a national disaster. The government did not, because declaring it's a political decision. Declaring it means admitting certain things. Declaring it means committing that many more resources and all that. So, one thing which has happened in independent India is that, and especially in the wake of this green revolution, that we created a whole structure whereby monocrops were incentivized and a whole infrastructure for procurement and distribution of that was created, which helped us in tiding over acute shortages and all, whereas and when it was required. Something which did not exist prior to that. Which did not exist prior to even mid-60s. Okay, so we had those famines and all those things. Now, creation of this structure has enabled us to mitigate acute hunger to a reasonable extent. But mitigating acute hunger does not quite mean that we have become food secure if you take the term in its proper sense. So that is one thing. And again, as I said, decision about hunger and famines and all. And it is not for me. I certainly have my very pronounced political predilections and understandings. But just go by the various reports that have been brought out by commissioners to food security appointed by the Supreme Court. Harsh Mandar also said one thing, that wherever there had been hunger deaths, when we paid a second visit, nothing had improved, the situation had only worsened. Okay, so that's a political thing. It's not a matter of technical thing. Yes, if it were just technically to be decided, then certainly we should have admitted that these are the drawbacks and this is where we have failed. We should try and make it up. But not admitting it only helps complicate things. It does not help solve things. Now, what was the other part of it? Overnutrition. See, my idea is not to underplay or overplay. See, thing is, we have to have a very nuanced understanding of things. Okay, maybe oftentimes what happens is when we talk of the people, we stand in front of the mirror and we think we're seeing the people. But you have, when you're talking in terms of the country, okay, then you have to see the extent, the magnitude of the problem in the entire context of the country. I never said that overnutrition is not a problem. I said where it is a problem, for whom is it a problem, and then this is, you may or may not agree, but this is a very pronounced tendency that a lot of research funding and all, because who controls these research fundings? Who takes these kind of decisions and all? These are all concentrated in the hands of people who are affluent. Okay. Now they then decide the way things are projected, then the funding flows in that direction and all that, and we conveniently forget that we have the largest number of hungry people people in the world, not just in proportionate terms, but in absolute terms as well. Okay, so the idea is to place it in its perspective, not in negation of one problem with respect to another problem. That is what my submission was.
Thank you. We now move on to the felicitation. I request volunteers to kindly come up the stage. I request Dr. Vikram Patel to kindly accept this memento as a mark of gratitude from us. I request.
Just add one more comment. I mean, sometimes there was this data on malnutrition in Gujarat came. And our Prime Minister said, you see, Gujarat is a middle class state and people like to remain thin and fit and fine. So that's how you can describe malnutrition as well.
I now request Dr. Vikas Bajpai to kindly accept this memento. I request Dr. Sanjay Mehendale to kindly accept this memento as a mark of gratitude.
Esteemed guests and delegates, I am pleased to announce that we have in our midst Mr. Ravi Bhatnagar, a distinguished alumnus of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences and Harvard Business School. Due to logistical delays, he could not join us sooner during a prior panel discussion. Mr. Ravi Bhatnagar is the current Director of External Affairs and Partnerships with Reckitt Benckiser, Africa, Middle East and South Asia. A motivator by nature, Mr. Bhatnagar has been instrumental in developing and delivering the immensely successful Dettol Banega Swachh Bharat campaign, along with various other programs aimed at improving lives through better public health and education. Mr. Bhatnagar has been honored by the Honorable President of India for his contributions to reducing open defecation. With such noteworthy accomplishments, Mr. Ravi Bhatnagar has brought immense pride to his alma mater, living up to its motto of reimagining futures at scales previously unimaginable. I would like to graciously invite Mr. Bhatnagar to share some pearls of wisdom and experience amongst this diverse delegation gathered today. Mr. Bhatnagar, please give a big round of applause.
Hi guys, very good afternoon. After lunch, it happens like many of us sleep. Many of us are actually asking questions. That's a very nice sign, like still, we are awake and we are asking. It's my privilege to be here on the campus again. I came here last year also and I spent some time. It's interesting to see how my tribe is increasing. So I was actually discussing with someone today, like we were 10 when we were a batch here. I passed in 2004 from health administration batch with research. Journey was very exciting, like by virtue of studying here and some academically good marks and other things, got the GRD Tata Full Fellowship, went to Harvard Business School, did my MBA, came back, gave exam for the World Bank and for the EDB, and joined the bank as a YP, but left it very soon in 1 year's time. And then thought like, let me put my efforts in doing something really good, which is actually again reminded today by these two presentations which I was able to see. Working with the LWE districts, which is a left-wing extremist districts in India, on diarrhea, on malnutrition, on working with the female sex workers and all that. From there I started the career. Moved on further, started working with the Clinton Foundation, used to report to Hillary Clinton on the drug access programs and breaking the cartels of Indian pharmaceutical companies. who were supplying the HIV medicine in countries like Uganda, Ethiopia, Botswana and others, where the epidemic was around, you can say almost 40% population was HIV positive, and drugs were supplied from India because India is one of the larger exporter of this medicines, the cocktail drugs and other things. From there, moved to the corporate assignment 3.5 years back now. So started looking into the work in India, was basically taking care of the external affairs and strategic partnerships. From there, moved to South Asia, and now Asia, Middle East and Africa, which means around 40 countries. Few of the countries are very interesting to work with, like Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India and many others. I see a lot of guys from PMIR course from TISS around me, around 40 of them actually, they report to me in various capacities. So it gives me a lot of pride to be there as a part of this big community here, and the friends from the public health background and social epidemiology, etc., etc. What's interesting is why I come to TISS, why I have started coming to TISS is I always think let's give back to the campus in terms of at least a presence. Sorry, I couldn't come from the morning flight, the first one from Delhi to Mumbai, but then I thought it will be very wasteful Saturday if I'm not coming to the campus and not spending time. I'm very sure we are all studying hard, working hard. This is also a perspective to give the long presentations and long speeches, but actually the ideal size of listening to someone is maximum 60 seconds. If you are not able to communicate your story in 60 seconds to 90 seconds, people don't listen to you much. And I am very sure things are changing in the public health space also, with the new things coming up like artificial intelligence coming, the bots, etc., etc. And I am seeing it how blockchain is being used in the companies, in the public health sector. If I have to say, okay, these many kids were SAM kids and these many kids were MAM kids. So many times organizations just give the big numbers until unless someone do the DLHS or NFHS, etc., etc. Good thing is to have the markers, the face markers, where now you have the Apple can when you can use the phone to open your phone with your facial recognition. Why not to actually see the kids who are SAM kids and you have the right data, etc., etc., and you can track the journey of this kid. What really inspires me is on 3rd of February 2013 there was an article which came into the Time magazine. I'll just open my phone and tell you what was the title of the Times magazine on that day. Give me a sec, I will just take a second to tell you. Yeah, it says this cover. There was a cover of on the cover. There was a small kid on the cover. It says this baby could live to be 142 years old. I was really surprised, how it is possible, when it will be possible. We will be able to do something on that. Can we improve children's health? Because the initial 1,000 days of the children, that will really change the future of the kid, and that definitely it will also impact on the GDP of the country and the spending done on the disease. And with Ayushman Bharat in place, I really think until unless the prevent framework and promote framework of the public health is not strengthened, a lot of money will be going out to the insurance companies, which will be basically the treatment part. So as a public health person, I do think we also need to start looking into the P&L modelings, etc., which is profit and loss, because either these are companies or INGOs or other companies like the startups, etc. It's very important to see the profit and loss, and sometimes it's much beyond the return on investment. It's more about basically the purpose-led business. It's more about how purpose comes first than generating your profits in the business. Today I was reading one of the articles from the World Economic Times forum, there is a 13-year guy who has found a solution to early detect the pancreatic cancer, a 13-year-old. Isn't really interesting? Apple 4 watch which has come can diagnose your heart rate, can give you your ECG, you don't need a paramedic or someone to help you with all that. Technology is moving fast, and my only submission to all of you is basically, time is changing very fast. We need to equip ourselves, but some basic fundamentals always remain the same. Two things I would like to say on that. One is trust. Trust in your faculty, trust in your institute, and trust in your fellow beings you work with. That's the first thing. Because trust is the fundamental thing of all the things. You are working in a small team, a big team, or a super big team, or multi-country team, etc., etc. Second thing is, epidemiology by nature, when we study about the multiplier, the impact multipliers and blended finance and other things, looks very interesting, but we should not forget the basics. The basics come from the time and energy we put in learning and disseminating. Just to share a small anecdote, when I was in TISS, my first research paper in Lancet came in the second year. I was one of the persons who was part of one of the journals. And I never, after working also in the corporate sector and many others, like I have around 22 publications in BMJ, in PLOS and Lancet altogether, as an author, as a co-author, etc., etc. So learning should not, fall down. So we should have learning regularly, continuously, if we really want to grow. And money is bigger in the market, just to tell you all. Because many of us, when we are in TISS, in health administration, hospital administration, we do think, so really is the market ready to pay you? Market is ready to pay you almost equal or more than other courses which are available in the market. And you guys have very big reputation from TISS. And last year I recruited around 10 people from TISS. There is a lady called Shraddha, who was today at Amitabh Bachchan's residence and giving her brief about the sanitation outcomes. I have the picture, I couldn't put it here, but happy to share with the faculty members and Dr. Shalini Bharat. Last but not least, thank you for accepting me as one of the speakers, and all apologies for delay to come here. Looking forward to have a very meaningful relationship with TISS and others also who have come from other universities and colleges. And may our tribe increase with full wisdom, and we do the best. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you for this inspiring address, Mr. Bhatnagar. I am sure your words of wisdom have been accepted by many of our students, prompting them to follow in your footsteps. I would like to have student delegates please offer you a memento as a token of our gratitude. Please come ahead. Can you please give a big round of applause? Yes.
Diversity is a very big agenda for the women folks. Diversity is a very big agenda. Everyone wants to have women coming in the leadership position and breaking the ceiling. So best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi Bhatnagar.